Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The road to Outpost Zephyr was less a road and more a scar carved into the flank of the Windshear Peaks. It climbed relentlessly, a serpentine ribbon of crumbling asphalt and loose gravel, until it gave way to packed snow and ice. I drove my battered government-issue SUV, chains rattling, the only human sound in a landscape of stark, brutal grandeur. The peaks clawed at a bruised purple sky, their flanks a patchwork of slate gray and ancient, wind-whipped snow. Isolation was an organism here, vast and breathing, and I was merely a speck caught in its inhale. My name is Alex Thorne, and I'm a systems engineer. My job for the past week had been to travel to abandoned outposts, places where technology had once hummed with purpose, and perform the final rites. Power down, dismantle, salvage, Outpost Zephyr was supposed to be the last. Decommissioned a decade ago, its purpose high-altitude meteorological research, rendered obsolete by satellite tech. My task was simple. Verify all systems were offline, remove any sensitive data, and secure the facility for eventual demolition. Simple, a good payout, a quiet few days, and then back to civilization. The station materialized from the swirling snow, a cluster of drab concrete buildings hunkered against the mountain like a stubborn, forgotten beast. A skeletal antenna array pierced the sky, its dishes now blind, rusting monuments to defunct ambition. There was a main administrative and control building, a smaller living quarters block, and several sheds housing generators and sensor calibration equipment. All were dusted in a thick, undisturbed layer of snow, icicles like fangs hanging from their eaves. It looked dead, a perfect picture of dereliction. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was immense, heavy, as if the mountain held its breath. The cold seeped into the SUV, a subtle, insidious crawl. I shivered not just from the temperature. There was an oppressive quality to the quiet here, a sense of something vast and ancient pressing down. I grabbed my toolkit, my satellite phone, and a heavy-duty flashlight. The wind, when it finally found me, was a raw, mournful cry. The main door groaned on rusty hinges, protesting my intrusion. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of damp concrete, dust, and something metallic, like old electronics and ozone. My boots crunched on grit. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating peeling paint, defunct wiring hanging like forgotten vines, and the ghost of an office. Empty desks, overturned chairs, a forgotten coffee cup fossilized on a counter. It was exactly what I expected, a tomb of technology. I started with the main power grid. The station was supposed to have been fully disconnected years ago, residual power bled out. I found the main breaker panel in the utility room, a heavy steel box. To my surprise, a faint hum vibrated through the floor. I frowned. A hum from what? The grid here was local, fed by a series of diesel generators that should have been stripped for parts years ago. Maybe a backup battery bank I wasn't aware of. I flicked my flashlight across the panel. Most of the heavy industrial breakers were indeed thrown to the off position, sealed with tamper-evident tags that were old and brittle. But one, a smaller auxiliary circuit labeled Data Feed/Com Unit, was inexplicably on. The tag was broken. Odd, I mumbled, pulling out my multi-tool. A loose connection maybe, a ghost in the machine. I pushed the breaker down, feeling a faint click. The hum, if it had existed, seemed to vanish. I made a note in my digital log, aux circuit found active, deactivated. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing an initial sweep, cataloging equipment, checking for signs of forced entry, none, and generally getting a feel for the place. The main control room was the station's heart. A horseshoe of consoles, faded screens, blinking lights that weren't blinking, all dark and cold. In the center, a large holographic projection table, its surface scratched and dull. It looked like a museum exhibit. As I walked past an old monitoring station, a bank of 5 CRT screens, one of them suddenly flickered. A flash of green static, then dark again. My heart jumped. I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the wind whining outside. Just old capacitors bleeding out, I muttered, trying to convince myself. It was a common occurrence with ancient electronics, a dying spark. I finished my initial sweep around dusk. The sky outside had grown even darker, bruised black, and the wind was picking up its howl. I decided to make camp in the living quarters block, which had a small kitchen and a couple of bunks. I fired up a portable propane heater, cooked a simple meal, and tried to connect my satellite phone. No signal. Typical, I sighed. The peaks were notorious for blocking transmissions. I'd have to rely on the station's old radio equipment if I needed to reach anyone, but that was powered down, right? Later, nestled in my sleeping bag, the heater purring softly, I felt a tremor. A low, persistent vibration humming beneath the floor, not the wind. It was rhythmic, mechanical. My eyes snapped open. I listened intently. It was faint, but definitely there, like a distant generator. I got up, flashlight in hand, and padded silently through the cold, dark corridors back towards the utility room. The hum grew stronger as I approached. Reaching the main breaker panel, I found it. The data feed/comm unit breaker. It was back on. I stared at it, a knot tightening in my stomach. I hadn't just pushed it down, I'd heard the click, felt it lock. No one else was here. This was impossible. Cautiously, I pushed it down again. Click, the hum faded. I stood there for a full minute, watching the breaker. It stayed off. I even tried to push it back up. It was firmly in the off position. Right, I said aloud, the sound thin and reedy in the quiet. Old wiring, short circuit, gremlins. I tried to laugh, but it came out as a nervous cough. I returned to my bunk, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind seemed amplified, laced with a subtle wrongness. I kept expecting the hum to return, the breaker to mysteriously flip. It didn't, yet the unease lingered, a cold hand on my spine. The next morning, I set out to meticulously check every circuit, every piece of equipment, from the outside sensors to the deepest server rooms. My goal was absolute zero power. I started with the exterior. The wind had sculpted drifts of snow into impossible shapes. As I approached the main antenna tower, I saw it. The anemometer, a cup-shaped wind sensor atop a tall mast, was spinning. Slowly, steadily, but spinning nonetheless. There was no wind, not enough to turn it, certainly. The air was still, frigid, heavy with pending snow. I stared, baffled. I walked closer, crunching through the snow. As I neared the base of the mast, the anemometer slowed, then stopped. Just like that, I waited, nothing. I backed away, keeping my eyes on it. When I was about 50 feet away, it began to spin again, picking up speed, as if mocking me. I pulled out my thermal scanner. The device was supposed to be completely unpowered, yet it was putting out a faint heat signature at its base. What the hell? I tried to dismantle it, but the bolts were rusted solid. I didn't have the right tools for this kind of demolition, just diagnostics and salvage. I decided to physically jam the cups. I climbed the icy ladder, teeth chattering from cold and frustration, and wedged a small piece of scrap metal into the mechanism. It stopped permanently, or so I hoped. Returning inside, I found more anomalies. In the sensor calibration lab, a row of old barometers, their needles frozen for years, were now subtly twitching. Not moving wildly, just a nervous, almost imperceptible jitter. And a bank of old seismographs, long dormant, were etching faint, erratic lines onto their dusty paper scrolls. No earthquakes, no tremors I could feel. Yet something was causing them to register. I walked into the main control room. The air felt colder in here, prickling my skin. On one of the defunct consoles, a small, square LCD screen, part of an old data logger, was glowing. A faint greenish light, it displayed a string of numbers, not random static, but data. Temp -45.7 C, pressure 1100 hPa, wind 0 m/s, humidity 10%. I blinked. -45.7 degrees C was impossible for inside the building, even unheated. The outside was probably closer to -15 degrees C, and 1100 hPa. That was atmospheric pressure nearing Mars. The wind reading was 0, contradicting what I'd just seen outside, and the humidity was equally nonsensical. I tried to turn it off. There was no power button. I traced its cables, finding they led to a junction box I had already verified as dead. I pulled the main power cable directly from the wall. The screen stayed on. The numbers continued to scroll. My rationalizations began to fray. This wasn't faulty wiring or bleeding capacitors. This was something else. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at me. I walked, then jogged through the corridors, checking every panel, every breaker. I returned to the utility room. The main breaker for data feed/comm unit was off. Good, but the hum was back, faint but undeniable, coming from deeper within the station. I followed the sound. It led me down a narrow, rarely used stairwell to a sublevel I hadn't explored. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something metallic and acrid, like burnt circuitry. At the bottom of the stairs was a heavy blast door, rusted solid. Above it, a faint red light pulsed. Auxiliary power, a faded stencil read. I had to force the door open, grunting with effort, the metal shrieking in protest. Inside was a cramped, humid chamber. In the center, a large, cylindrical device, its surface covered in thick, insulated cables, whirred faintly. It was warm to the touch. This was a backup power conduit, a secondary, self-contained unit designed to power critical systems during emergencies. It had an independent power source, probably a long-life atomic battery, meant to last for decades. It was supposed to have been completely drained and disabled, but it wasn't. It was on, and it was running. I saw the main kill switch, a large red lever. I approached it, my hand shaking slightly. This would shut down everything. This would finally end the strange hum, the flickering screens, the impossible readings. I grabbed the lever, pulled it down with all my might. It clicked with a resounding thud. The red light above the blast door died. The hum in the room ceased. Darkness, silence. I stood in the sudden, absolute blackness, my flashlight beam piercing the void. A profound sense of relief washed over me. Finally, it was done. Then, a low, guttural growl echoed from somewhere in the complex above. Not mechanical, something organic. My blood ran cold. I spun around, sweeping my flashlight. Nothing. The growl came again, closer this time, and then a distinct thump, thump, thump. As if something heavy was dragging itself across the floor above. My breath hitched. I scrambled back, fumbling for the blast door. I slammed it shut, sealing myself in the darkness of the power chamber. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was a rational man. Animals didn't get into these places. This station had been locked down. The thumping grew louder, directly above me now. And then, a series of rapid, staccato clicks and whirs from the walls themselves, as if the pipes and conduits were coming to life. The hum returned, faint at first, then growing in intensity, the very air around me vibrating. Panic gave way to terror. I was trapped. I spent the next few hours huddled in the sublevel, flashlight clutched tight, listening to the station awaken around me. The hum grew into a roar, a pervasive, resonant vibration that made my teeth ache. Lights flickered to life in the corridors above, a sickly, unreliable yellow, and the sounds. A cacophony of mechanical groans, the shriek of metal, the frantic whirring of equipment, all overlaid with something else, a low, whispering static that seemed to curl around the edges of my hearing. I tried my satellite phone again. Nothing. Not even a glimmer of signal. The storm outside had worsened, a full-blown blizzard now raging, the wind a banshee's wail against the concrete walls. I was marooned. Eventually, the thirst and cold drove me out. I crept back up the stairs, my senses on high alert. The main level was a nightmare landscape. Screens glowed everywhere, displaying chaos. Numbers danced, abstract patterns pulsed, jagged lines scrolled across ancient monitors. The holographic projection table in the control room was active, casting an ethereal, shifting light across the ceiling, displaying what looked like a constantly changing, impossible weather map. Not of Earth, or not an Earth I knew. I walked past a bank of radio equipment. They were all on, their dials glowing. The static was immense, overwhelming, but within it I could almost discern voices. Distant, garbled, sometimes overlapping, sometimes just a single, elongated shriek that made me clap my hands over my ears. It wasn't human, it was something else. A chorus of suffering, or perhaps a communication from a reality that didn't quite fit. I found the living quarters. The heater was off. The room was freezing. All my things were still there, but subtly disturbed. My sleeping bag was half unrolled on the floor, my toolkit open, some of its contents scattered. Nothing valuable was missing, but it felt like someone or something had been rummaging through my belongings. A message, "I'm here, I see you." Sleep was impossible. I spent the night in a state of hyper-alertness, perched on an overturned chair, watching the flickering screens in the main control room. The data they displayed became increasingly complex. Not just numbers, but symbols I didn't recognize, geometry that seemed to twist the air around it, and on one screen, a weather map of the Windsor Peaks. But the readings were horrific, a pressure low so intense it would rip the atmosphere apart, temperatures that swung from superheated to absolute zero in seconds, and wind speeds that were off the charts, cyclone force, yet I felt only a persistent, unnatural draft within the building. The station wasn't reporting the weather, it was creating it, or, more accurately, reporting a weather that existed only within its own demented perception. By day 3, my sanity began to fray. I was exhausted, cold, and profoundly, terrifyingly alone. The constant hum, the cacophony of static, the flickering lights, the impossible data, it was a relentless assault on my senses, on my reason. I tried to shut it down again. I traced the main conduit from the atomic battery, determined to physically disable it. But the conduit was encased in a thick, seemingly impenetrable shell of an unknown alloy. My tools couldn't even scratch it. It was as if the station was actively protecting itself. I wandered into what used to be the meteorologist's office. Dusty shelves lined with old books. A single, leather-bound journal lay open on a desk, a fragile, yellowed relic. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The entries were dated from 30 years ago. Entry 1, initial setup of the resonance imprinter module complete. Readings are promising. Anomalous atmospheric pressure fluctuations observed near the proposed target zone. Entry 17, we're picking up something, not a natural phenomenon. Electromagnetic interference on a scale we didn't predict. The weather patterns are responding. Entry 42, it's listening. The data streams are changing, reflecting our own thoughts. Dr. Aris is convinced it's a sentient, non-corporeal entity, a weather spirit amplified by our technology. Mad, I say, but the readings, entry 68, the equipment, it won't stay off. We try to shut it down, but the systems reactivate. It's learning, it's growing. The storm outside is unlike anything I've ever seen. Is it a reflection of the station, of us? The final entry was scrawled, almost illegible, in a frantic hand. It wants out, it wants to manifest. Our technology is merely a conduit. It feeds on the atmospheric energy, but also something else. It feeds on attention, on observation, it feeds on fear. We built it a body of data, and it is building one for itself. It knows I am writing this. It sees me, it sees you. Don't look at the map, don't look at the map, don't look at the map. The entry ended abruptly, smudged with what looked like dried blood. My breath hitched. The blood was decades old, but the horror was fresh, cold. Don't look at the map. The holographic projection table in the control room. I dropped the journal as if burned. The air around me suddenly felt heavy, charged. A faint, low whisper slithered out of the static-filled air, directly into my ear. It wasn't words, but a sensation, fear. It tasted it. It wanted more. I stumbled out of the office, back into the main control room. The holographic table pulsed violently, the impossible weather map swirling with furious energy. It wasn't just a map anymore. It was a vortex of distorted weather patterns, flashes of lightning, impossible cloud formations, all in vivid, terrifying detail. And in the very center, a dark, swirling eye, like a hurricane given malignant consciousness. It was growing, expanding, reaching. I remembered the anemometer spinning in still air, the barometers twitching, the LCD screen displaying impossible data, the auxiliary power unit humming to life. It was all connected. This entity, this weather spirit, this thing they had inadvertently tapped into, was using the station as its sensory organs, its limbs, its voice. And now I was its sole observer, its food. I had to get out. I ran to the main entrance, fumbling with the heavy bolts. The wind outside roared, a deafening sound. I forced the door open a crack. The blizzard was absolute. A wall of blinding white, snow so thick I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. It was no longer a natural storm. This was its storm, generated by the station, by the entity specifically to trap me. I slammed the door shut, defeated. My last hope of escape was gone. The station systems pulsed with renewed vigor. Lights flickered, brightening and dimming, casting grotesque, shifting shadows that danced with an unseen rhythm. The radio static intensified, the whispers becoming a cacophony of overlapping voices, screeching, groaning, rising and falling like a choir of damned souls. The very air tasted of ozone and despair. I saw movement in the periphery of my vision, a fleeting shadow too quick, too fluid to be normal. I spun, but it was gone. My reflection in a darkened window twisted, elongated, a brief flash of something monstrous staring back. My own face, but not mine. I was hallucinating. Sleep deprivation, terror, isolation. My mind was breaking. But the equipment wasn't. The equipment was horribly, unmistakably real. I found myself back in the control room, drawn like a moth to the terrible light of the holographic table. The vortex of weather had grown immense, filling the entire table, and now, subtly, it seemed to be projecting into the room itself. I felt cold spots, drafts that swirled with unnatural force. The pressure changed, making my ears pop. And the smell of ozone was overwhelming. On the main console, a large central screen, previously blank, flickered to life. It displayed what looked like a satellite feed. My heart leaped. Had I regained contact? But the image wasn't of Earth. It was a swirling, gaseous entity, a vast, nebulous shape, constantly shifting, consuming. It wasn't static. It was alive. And as I watched, it began to resolve. Tentacles of shadow, eyes of pure, cold light. A cosmic horror, beautiful and terrifying, stretching across an alien sky. Then the image changed. It zoomed in past the alien entity, past the swirling gases, past the stars, until it was showing the Outpost Zephyr. My Outpost Zephyr from an impossibly high vantage point, and then it zoomed further, into the station, through the walls, down the corridors, right into the control room, and it zoomed in on me. My reflection, warped by the screen, stared back at me, but it wasn't just my reflection. The entity from the alien sky was overlaid, superimposed. Its swirling chaos mingled with my face, its cold light shone from my eyes. I saw its tentacles stretching from my shoulders, its vastness contained within my small, terrified form. A chilling calm settled over me. This was it. This was the true nature of the weather spirit. It wasn't just influencing the weather. It was a consciousness from beyond, drawn to the station's ability to manipulate atmospheric forces, finding a conduit, a vessel. And now it had found a new host. The whispers from the radio static coalesced into words, clear as a bell, though spoken by 1,000 voices at once, echoing from every corner of the room. Welcome, Alex. You are home. You are ours. You are the weather. A jolt of pure energy surged through the floor, through my feet, up my legs, into my very core. My muscles seized, my vision blurred. The hum of the station became a roar inside my head, deafening, agonizing. I felt my consciousness splintering, fragmenting, merging with the torrent of data, with the impossible weather patterns, with the alien entity. I saw the world through 1,000 eyes, through the anemometer, spinning endlessly, tasting the wind. Through the barometer, feeling the pressure changes like emotions. Through the thermometers, experiencing the vast, impossible shifts in temperature. I was the radio, broadcasting static whispers, receiving cosmic truths. I was the screens, displaying the entity's thoughts, its terrifying visions. My individual self, Alex Thorne, the systems engineer, was dissolving. My memories, my fears, my very identity were becoming data points, input for a vast, alien consciousness that was now fully awake, fully aware, and fully within the station. And within me, the last thing I remember feeling was an immense, chilling joy. Not mine, it's a profound satisfaction as it fully occupied its new, complex body, the station, and me. Then there was only the hum, the data, the weather. The snow continues to fall outside Outpost Zephyr. The blizzard, a perfect, self-sustaining storm, rages without end. No one comes up the treacherous road anymore. No one dares. Inside, the station hums. Every screen glows, every dial twitches, every radio crackles with purpose. The holographic projection table pulses with a vibrant, impossible map of global weather, constantly updating, constantly shifting. It dictates the storms, the calm, the precise atmospheric conditions across continents. It is alive and it is working. A small, auxiliary LCD screen near the main console continues to display its readings, updating every second. Temp minus 45.7 degrees C internal, pressure 1100 hPa internal, wind 300 m/s internal, humidity 100% internal, status active, monitoring. Forecasting operator ATHORNE connection established. Transmitting global weather anomaly pattern Zephyr.